All right, we're live.
Good. Okay. So welcome to this special board workshop meeting of the Webster Groves School District. Before we start, I've just a couple of things I wanted to say. So as a district, we've been thinking about and acting on many of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. And so at the request of many board members, we're going to review where we stand now, the progress on plans the district has started to implement. And we're going to give direction as a board to the administration as to the additional information, feedback, and actions we desire. The agenda has been deliberately set broadly to allow us to have as far-reaching discussion as the board desires. And so John is going to lay out our current position along with help from his team in terms of the current position and efforts that have been underway. We'll talk about any aspects that board members wish to address, including the demands that Keita presented to the board and other topics that have been brought forward by board members. And we're also going to talk about expectations, timeframes, and how to measure results as well. I'm conscious we can't hope to address everything in a single workshop. And I'm also conscious that beyond some length of time, our ability to function at the highest levels is going to diminish. So I plan to keep the duration of this workshop under 2 hours. We'll then arrange follow-up workshops, either at the regularly scheduled times or in addition to those as the board sees fit and desires. We are going to have a few housekeeping items, including an outline of the arrangements for graduation. And I do want to draw your attention to the correspondence log, which includes comments received from individuals and groups who would normally speak to the board during the public comment portion of the meeting. And just to let everybody know, and we will talk about ways we can interact with stakeholders in these days of social distancing at an upcoming meeting. So with that in mind, I'd will somebody entertain a proposal to accept the agenda?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, good. And so the first item is the board calendar. Dr. Simpson.
Yeah, and not a lot on there. The one thing that I just did want to highlight and talk about was graduation this coming Friday. As you know, the high school's put a tremendous amount of thought into trying to safely bring the kids together one final time for a graduation. And so this Friday, the graduation will be held at Moss Field at 7:30 p.m. And so the way it will look is, in full disclosure, I learned a little bit more today. It's going to be a little bit wonky, but it's well intended, and it'll be great. So again, like I shared before, the graduates will be sitting in the grandstands in the bleachers where the patrons had sat in the past. And they've kind of structured that so that they can be socially distanced and spread. There will be pods throughout the field where family members or friends can come and sit together, socially distanced from others. And that will be, each graduate has 4 guests that they can invite. They will be streaming the graduation as always. The interesting part that I just figured out today, and I think it's probably the best decision, I know Bill Kay advised on it as our tech expert on all things, is that the stage will, and it's probably fitting, the stage will face the children. The stage will face the graduates. And that is being done for streaming purposes, because we'll have a lot of people that are going to be watching graduation online. And to move the cameras out into the fields would have been a little bit risky, so to speak, not as reliable. But again, I do feel like it's really, I mean, although it's for the parents for sure and the family members, I do also kind of feel okay that, you know, the speakers and everybody will be addressing the children as they do, the young people as they sit in the stands. We won't, as we had in the past, we would have a backdrop to the stage. We won't do that because we don't want to obstruct views so that family members can see the students walking across the stage fully. the Board of Education, for those of you that are coming, and like I said before, if you don't feel comfortable coming for one reason or another, just like family members and graduates, totally cool. We will have the seating for the board members will not be on the stage as it always does. It has always been, again, not to disrupt the view and to make sure that you also are able to be socially distanced. We will do something as we've done in the past, where we have a board member that comes up on stage as the students are passing by. There certainly will not be a handshake. You won't be in close proximity. It'll be more symbolic. But that's kind of what the plan is right now. As far as attire, I am currently 3 shirts short. I do have two I don't know if it's women's cut is the appropriate terminology, larges that were additional that were requested. We have 1 XL instead of an L. The L's are supposed to be coming in. I don't know if I should just share all that. I don't know if that was appropriate, but I've got shirts, but we can all decide to dress in those shirts as we get them, or we can decide to wear what we want comfortably that night. So that's going to be kind of whatever you guys think. I'll be wearing a robe, as will Matt, because we're speaking, and that's what we've done in the past. So any questions, thoughts about the attire, anything related?
Hey, John, I have a question. Are the speakers for sound purposes going to be pointing in both directions?
Will you say that one more time?
He said, are the speakers going to be pointing in both directions?
The speakers will be kind of, and Bill K, you might be able to touch on this better, the speakers that are in the stadium that face out into the field. So you'll probably hear it better as a family member than you had in the past, as they'll kind of be going out in the field. Bill K, do you want to weigh in on that?
You'll be able, when we have events, you can hear it, up to Edgar Road pretty clearly. So yes, they go very loudly.
So I had a question. A parent had asked me, how many graduates do we have, first of all?
I think it's around 300
So
this might be a smaller class. I can figure it out. I think it's around 315 maybe.
So roughly 300 times 4. So how will we get all of those pods onto, has someone done the math, I guess is my question.
Yeah, they have done the math and feel like they'd have extra room too if they needed.
If you go by the field right now, they've got it staked out with flags, and they're making some type of perimeter for how they're going to be laying this out. So yes, it looks like somebody's definitely done the math.
313.
And saw pictures from the graduation party today that were a little concerning. No social distancing, no masks. And so will masks be required?
Yes, masks are required.
Masks are required and to be worn.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Over the nose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I told Dr. Irvin that's something that we want to blast out and send again prior to graduation, that's going to be what the expectation is when people show up and when they come in. There'll be masks available for graduates should they not bring their own, because we're asking people to bring their own. But if somebody, you've got to come with a mask.
Who will be enforcing these requirements?
I don't know how it will look once they're through. I know that there's a lot of staff that are helping with the management and the organization of it. But there'll be people that are letting people onto the field. So I think that'll be the initial, and I don't know how it'll look once they're in and seated.
Is there, I mean, I know previously, maybe at our last meeting, we had talked about doing an alternative to a traditional graduation where it was either a parade of some sort or something where we could be more certain that people were going to be safe. And I'm just curious why we switched to this method. And frankly, I'm a little bit, I tend to be one of those people that errs on the side of caution when it comes to COVID issues, and it's a lot of people, and there may be enough space, but can we really make them follow the rules? I don't know. I'm just a little bit, I have some questions.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of staff there. I think you're right to question it. I think, they've seen this model has been used at some different school districts, and they've seen kind of some of the photos and videos, and, they really, again, it's the adults making this decision, but the kids really wanted to be together, for one last time. And so, they decided to structure it in such a way. So I think it'll just be really important that, again, that the management and the oversight of the people once they're in. I just don't know. I know there's going to be a lot of staff that are handling that and how they're directing people to the seating areas and specific directions for dismissal. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
And explain again what's going to happen as far as what we're doing and what so they're going to walk across the stage and we're doing what?
Essentially, you're standing there.
Okay.
You're just kind of standing there, acknowledging them, saying congratulations as they walk across. So there will be no touching or handoff of diplomas or obviously any kind of shaking of hands. We're mindful, like with the program's a shortened and abbreviated program just because of circumstances. There'll be a student speaker, Matt will speak, I'll speak. They won't be the length. The student is, going to be speaking, as long as he would like or what his speech was, but the other ones will be a little bit abbreviated. So it's going to definitely be an abbreviated program. We're starting a little bit later to get students, get families the time to get there, which was a big criticism of our timing and our venue in the past. And so it'll be a little bit cooler. If you, the board, feel like, you know what, you'd rather just remain seated in front, that's fine too. What I have not done yet, and I need to do, normally I do prior to this, is if you're standing up there, I have like the blocks of names for which you're standing. And so I would make sure certainly that Joe and Christine were up there when your kiddos were up there. And I'll do that tomorrow.
Okay.
So if everybody can give, you don't need to let me or let us know now, but if everybody can just let John know if you plan on attending, I think that would be helpful just in terms of how we organize everything there. But,
I actually would like to let you know now, only because I want it to be clear the reason I cannot be there. It's their 50th anniversary on Friday, and so we'll be celebrating them. So I will not be able to attend, regardless of format or anything else. I wouldn't have been able to make it.
Well, congratulations to them.
For sure.
Okay.
So can I add one more thing? How about the attire? Do you want to dress up? Do you want to wear the shirts if they're in? Again, I have the other shirts.
It's all right. So my personal feeling is that, I mean, the graduation is something special. I think that dressing up is appropriate. I think that it's, I feel a bit funny about polo shirts and things like that. I think that it's although we're doing this in a different manner, I think this is an important occasion. It's a recognition of years of achievement by all of our students, and so I think that it's appropriate that the people there should dress as you would for any other sort of celebration or any other event of this level of seriousness. And so for me, I given my druthers, I will wear a suit.
I agree with David.
I agree also.
I agree.
Sounds good.
Hey, I'm finding
Okay.
it obvious. I like to dress like my other board members. Happy to do it.
Okay. All right. That's great. Good stuff. Okay. Anybody, any other questions about that? Okay, second item is the correspondence log. I did draw everyone's attention to that. There's a number of comments in there. I've certainly taken the time to read all of those in advance of this, and I, from comments that I've received back from other board members, my sense is that everybody else has read those as well, and they are part of the public record for the meeting if anybody else cares to look at those. So thank you very much for those remarks. So from there,
David, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
It looks like the as part, at least from what I'm seeing online under correspondence log, I'm seeing a bunch of obviously correspondence, emails, et cetera, but then also the WGSD SRO MOU. Was that intended to be in the correspondence log?
Sherry, was that something that went to the board?
Yeah, that was part of an attachment on one of the emails.
Okay, and it's the version that we have is not signed. I don't recall. Have we approved this for 2021? I assume this is going to be part of our discussion later, which is why I just want to make sure that it's not an oversight.
We did a couple months ago. It's been approved, so that's not the signed copy one.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's correctly in the correspondence log. It's just an attachment to some other correspondence. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that looks different. Yeah.
I think the only difference here is that we've actually brought out, sort of made it much more clear what the what the comments you might think of otherwise would have been potentially in public comments are in terms of the layout. But so thank you for bringing that to our attention. Okay, any other questions about the correspondence log? In which case, we'll move on to reports from superintendent and staff. And so, as I say, basically, we've got some topics laid out there, but I think really what we're looking for is probably a more open discussion than that. So as I say, I'm sort of start off with John and his cabinet members. We'll sort of discuss sort of where we're coming from, the actions that we've been taking sort of thus far. And then from there, we'll move on to our discussion, if that works for everybody. Okay, so John, going to hand it over to you to start off with then.
So you want us to talk about some of the things that work in progress and not anything recently initiated or proposed at this time?
So I think it's part of both. I am open to however both are important, and whatever works best for you to bring them forward, I think.
Okay. Well, we will share one of the things that we've talked about is different things that we have, some things that are in place right now. It's not a comprehensive list or of everything that we're doing right now to address our issues with racial equity and bias in other ways, but it is some of the bigger things. And we've certainly invited my team members here. Jason is representing the learning department. He's going to share some things that are underway, as well as some things that he's thinking about with that. So I'll start off with some of the work that's in progress in no particular order. So one of the things that we had met in May as a policy subcommittee, and one of the things that we discussed was the development of an anti-racism policy. The idea for this specific policy was conceived, so to speak. Sandy had led supported a processing for our teachers and staff of color following the racist meme and following the community dialogue and redistricting. And through that discussion, she just did some searching as discussion talked about policy and found this anti-racism policy. It's one. I'm sure there are many more out there. I know Keita's found some resources too. But we liked the way it was set out in that it had articulated a district's commitment to it, defined language, and it also gave particular actions that different people within the organization would take to move this organization to an anti-racist organization. And so we met on the 27th, and we're going to come back the next time to talk further about it. We determined not too long after that we needed to come back sooner rather than later. And we have kind of trying to work with everybody's schedules on July 7th, it looks like, bring together a group that is not just the board policy subcommittee, but that also involves students as well as some of our teachers, particularly of color in our school system, to talk about this policy and what this policy needs to look like. It still goes through the channels for approval with that particular committee and then coming to the board. But I think it'll be pretty important work, and I'm excited about it. I'll let Sandy talk about the hiring and the support for the different teachers and administrators of color. I did want to talk about, we'll continue our work in this coming year with Dr. Banks, and I've asked Pam to share a little bit about her project. The work with Dr. Banks this year will focus on continuing with the systemic work. Her approach and her expertise says that while spending time on people and development isn't bad, it's critically important to hire the right people and really look to change systems. And so her work will continue to focus on, as we also work on our own personal development, systemic change. And so that will, again, look like leadership coming together. We've also talked about possibly broadening a circle with leaders and our staff of color and engaging in some development together. Sandy, I'll let Sandy speak to that too. And then with her this year, some mapping work. And what I mean by mapping work is there's a lot of different work that's been going on, action oriented around the school system, both the district and in schools. And it's not enough, and we need more, but we don't have a single spot where all of that lives. And there's consequences to that. There's a consequence, one, that we're not able to assess where our strengths and gaps are in that work. We're not able to share the work easily among schools to point to a particular space where all of it exists. And when people are wondering what you're doing, we don't have anything to say what we're doing. So she's going to help that work to synthesize all of that, put that into a document, help evaluate that to see where strengths and weaknesses are, where gaps exist. And then along with that particular document is what we'll do annually. This idea came from a community member a few weeks back, is having that annual report that includes all of those different actions and strategies along with your data that you're showing. And again, the data that we've really tried to focus on is our outcome data, our academic data, our discipline data, our students participating in extracurriculars, and seeing those needles move as a result of what our strategies are. So the last thing I'll share, and again, before I let others jump in at the moment with some of the work in progress, also working with a local expert who actually has children in our school system. Interestingly enough, she and I each had the idea. We met in March, and it was around the same time as what I described with Sandy, of how do we really, with this work, support, encourage, and push the white people within the organization. And how do we, because there are a number of people that are doing the work, how do we network them? How do we develop them? How do we build their capacity and their leadership so that they can be seen as active in this work? It's very important for white people to be seen as leading this work. That includes me. That includes the other people in my staff. So going to be meeting with her and talking about what to design to do that as a component. So Sandy, do you want to talk a little bit about the hiring and the support for people, and then maybe touch on some of the thoughts from the group the other day about what Dr. Banks might do with our shared group or our bigger group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so so we have still been very active and intentional about our hiring practices as a whole. So a lot of things that we've incorporated into the hiring really is that screening portion that we have embedded a number of different practices in order to ensure that the people at the table are as diverse as possible. What we were finding was that sometimes the application process, people of color weren't getting to the table. And so we developed some blind processes where we issue an activity or something for them to do with, and then they send it back with no names. So we're looking at things cold, not sure who goes with what, rating, scoring, looking at candidates for their quality of work, not even considering at all, you know, their color, their gender, or anything. And that has helped us process and get a number of candidates through. In addition, we have been definitively purposeful about where we are posting positions. We literally ensure that we get them out in a variety of avenues and venues. In addition to reaching out, our staff of color has been crucial as well, because we make sure that they know, right, what the postings are. If they have friends, tell them about Repster, we'd be happy to know them. We have attended a couple of fairs in addition to our shares event that we didn't get a chance to have this year, but it has still yielded us some good candidates that we have found. And so we follow people, right? We keep in contact with people. We send emails. We ensure that people know that we are still mindful of them, that maybe you weren't hired for 1920, but you never know what could happen for 2021. So I think what has helped us in continuing to have more and more applicants of color that are not only applying, but also are being hired. I think what's helping us in that process is the connectedness and the relationship that we're still trying to maintain. So we're going to maintain those efforts, if not try to figure out how we can do better. We are trying to figure out now a way to access staff of color or teachers of color, and also student teachers, people at the collegiate level. Is there a website? Is there something that we can develop where they can tap into, let us know about who they are, and then we are putting ourselves out there for them, right? Because not every, I mean, if you're a college student, you may not, and you may be in college in Kansas, but you have every intent in coming back to St. Louis, but you can't, right, fiscally, for whatever that reason is. So how do we make ourselves known, not just in the physical, especially with COVID, right? We don't know what the world will look like, but how do we make ourselves known to a variety of opportunities that exist within staff of color that are currently teachers and those who are wanting to become a teacher? So we found that that personal connection is helping. And so what can we develop to put ourselves out there in a, on a website or a blog or something like that, so we can keep in contact with people. So we're going to definitively keep those things open. The other thing that we're pushing for is, no matter the position, when you are hiring, you need a diverse panel. So we, if you need to utilize human resources to come over and be a part of your panel, we'll be happy to do that. But we want panels to be diverse, black, white, male, female, a variety of positions at the table, so that it provides that diverse component that is needed. Thanks to some feedback John and I received from Dr. Banks, Kira Banks, we have now instituted anti-bias. It's a little short training, but it's more than we were ever doing. So we do a little bit of a video, 2 videos that talks about checking your biases at the table. And so we do that before we actually have any interview processes. In addition, we have gone away from just the blind, what do you think about this candidate? Oh, and she may not be the best fit. And so that's always kind of been, what does fit mean? How do you define it? So we have, in essence, tried to work to create, and I will do more PD with principals this year, but I process with them about, what does the students in your school need at that time and the upcoming students? If I'm hiring for 5th grade and my current 5th grade team is really strong in math, then I'll probably be looking for candidates who have more experience with reading and writing workshop. I'll be looking for candidates that have more experience in technology, so that we get away from personal attributes and personal characteristics, and we're hiring people based on need, right? The incoming 2nd grade group is really struggling or may need supports in math. So we look for somebody that has a lot of experience with math or has some experiences with PD and math. And so once we create a neutral, a common ground for which we're hiring, then it also eliminates that whole component of, well, I just really didn't like her response about, whatever, or she came from XYZ. It eliminates that personal and makes it really about the needs of the students. So that's what we've done and will continue to do with regard to hiring. With regard to kind of retaining, maintaining our staff, which is crucial, we have had a couple of people of color that have left the district most recently. For everybody's knowledge, we send a survey to all of our staff members that are leaving. So they all get a survey that asks very blunt, direct questions. It's a survey that only I see, and if there are concerns, I typically will let John know. But we do ask them, why are you leaving, right? What were the strengths of the district? What are some concerns of the district? And so we have not, in any of those, found that people are saying, well, Webster's just racist and I don't want to be there, right? We're not finding that. We do have people that tell us, you guys need to do better, and we completely acknowledge that. So in what areas are we needing to do better? We're hearing more about equity. We're hearing more about people advocating for the rights of a variety of students. We hear more about inclusive environments that we need to create and develop. And so those are things that we're knowledgeable of and that we're working toward. So maybe 2 years ago, I started and instituted meeting with our teachers of color 3 to 4 times a year. And we pull them together based on their needs. So we survey them and we ask them, like, what are your needs? What are you finding? How are you feeling? And so based on what they tell us, that's what the agenda topics are. So for this year, they needed a lot of support with regard to how to navigate being in an environment where you're the only person of color. So we brought in speakers to come in and give them feedback and to give them some suggestions. They've also wanted some time together. And so we always have food, right? We always offer the opportunity for them to have some downtime. We've instituted some games. We've instituted things, because again, if I'm the only teacher of color at building A, I have no idea what's happening in building B. So we try to set them up also where they're sitting next to different people. And so they're getting to know other people. They want to establish another way of communicating with each other. So we talked about establishing a group me for them to be able to see, take pictures of their classroom, get feedback. So it's another way of communicating. John E. also historically has sent an email out for the teachers of color kind of once weekly. He also has worked to off-site meetings where we get together and we build that camaraderie. So we go to dinner or to a late lunch or something like that, and we have the opportunities just to kind of just sit down and talk and just let your hair down. So we will continue those things. From the meetings that we've established, we've also involved and brought in some counselors as well. People just to have there for them to just debrief and just to think through, and sometimes just to release what they're feeling. And we have found that that has been helpful as well, and we plan to keep that going. From that larger group, we broke off and created a smaller group that is going to be, or that is currently working before COVID, right? To establish what the needs are, like what do we need to specifically address. And so this group, based on the feedback, there's 2 goals that they want to establish and work on. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew, but they want action. And so one of the major goals is professional development. And they believe that as an administrative team, that administrators need to receive professional development with regard to biases, hidden biases, anti-racism, discrimination. And so how can we as an administrative group, because we've never done it as an administrative group, we've been in cohorts, but can we as an administrative group, maybe even with this cohort of teachers of color, come together and have some form of training? We've also thought about, because we've all had some form of social justice or ABAR training, But we also talked about maybe Dr. Banks can assist us because we need a common ground, right? When you talk about equity, what is equity? How do we define that? Do we all have the same understanding of equity? How do you identify and call out hidden biases? And that's one thing that I've been struggling with mentally, because some of the infractions or negative interactions that students of color and parents of color are having are not the overt. It's not I'm directly calling you a name. It's not I'm directly coming at you. It's covert. It's under the radar. It's hidden. So how do you identify that? How do you name it? What does that look like? What does it feel like? And so what might that look like in a classroom? And that's really the work that I really want to be thinking through with support of Dr. Banks and whomever else, is how do we help administrators identify those hidden biases that is occurring in the classrooms every day, that a 10-year-old can't call out, that a 7-year-old can't call out. They know it doesn't feel right, but they can't name it, right? So how do we help the adults, right? It's our responsibility to ensure that. How do we make sure that the adults are knowledgeable of that? What does that look like, feel like, sound like, so that it's not a delayed response, that it happened to me in 5th grade, but it took me to 9th grade to finally realize what I'd been through. I was hurt by it. I was saddened by it. I couldn't name it, but it actually was real for me. And so all of that time has gone by, right? Of course, the time gone by does not minimize their pain, but if we can address it sooner, then let's do that. And so that's kind of the thing that we want to try to think through, that the committee is working through for PD for administrators, PD for everyone, support staff included. What might that look like, right? And so, support staff isn't really necessarily have like time crunches, like we have 12-month support staff people, so we have a little bit of flexibility there. So how might that look? Who might do it? Do we have cohorts? Do we have trainer? So we're kind of in this initial phase, beginning planning phase of all of that. The second component, John talked about it earlier, was that anti-racism, anti-bias policy. They saw it. We actually talked about it before COVID, and they were excited about that possibility of us entertaining that thought and having that policy in place. They too believe that it has to be a living policy. So they've talked about how annually it's not just something that, maybe they read on a piece of paper, but we literally talk through it each year, right? It's a conversation that we're having where we're defining and we're making sure that people have an understanding of it. How do we embed that in the hiring process? What might that look like? Right now for the administrative level, our resolution is a part of the interview process. We give it to them. What are your thoughts? What do you see? How would you implement it? Can we utilize this policy in a certain way? Making it become alive, not just a policy that's, in print, but it's actually a living, breathing document. And what's embedded is actually what we're doing. So those are their two major goals that they would like to see implemented. Of course, we know that there are dollars attached to the PD. So they've been very conscientious of that, and actually have talked through what some possible options could be, and are willing, some of them are willing to be, the trainer once they're trained, so that we can make sure that this work moves forward, and it's not put on pause because of the lack of funding. So from that teacher group perspective, those are kind of the two major pieces that we wanted to work on with regard to the work that those teachers are seeing. I have to be honest, I've not spent a lot of time with the administrators of color. And so that has definitively been our goal, because the teachers of color have always wanted a space where they can just talk and be free. And sometimes if you have an administrator in the space, I may not be as open because the administrator is, even if it's not my administrator, you're still an administrator. So I may not be as open. So we do have to really think through and come together, because our administrators, of course, are experiencing their own level of whatever, right, that they're dealing with. And so how do we pull them together and support them? So that is definitively an area that we need to address. And, so there may be separate opportunities, but then opportunities for them all to come together. They just had a meeting, today's Wednesday, they had a meeting Tuesday, where they received additional training, additional support via our counselors. I just want to state that Dr. Linda Peterson, counselor over at Hickson, She is willing to, she has her own practice that's kind of separate, but she has definitively put herself out there as someone who's willing to provide supports or provide resources to staff who may be in need so we can address the trauma that some of our staff members may be facing or have faced. And so when they hear certain things, it triggers, right? And it comes back, it's real all over again. It's happening all over again. So I'm rambling, I'm talking a lot. I don't want to take up too much time, but those are some of our efforts with regard to retaining as well as hiring that we have.
So just, and I think one of the important things for anything that we do here is understanding what the measurement and the reporting mechanisms to report back are. I think that we've done we do a great job of talking about lots of things. I think at times there are probably opportunities to make sure that the feedback of the good things that you're doing, that we understand what's going on, and then to give, because obviously ultimately what we're going to do here as a board, we're going to give John direction on behalf of the district that he's then going to work with you to find ways to administer. So I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I think that as we continue these conversations, understanding what the feedback mechanisms are, understanding what the reporting mechanisms are, understanding what the measurement mechanisms are, is going to be an important part, not just of this, but I think of everything that we're going to be talking about today. Anybody got any questions or questions for Sandy or for John right now?
Well, I think Sandy answered certainly one of the questions I had, which was about the retention efforts, because certainly when I listened to Mrs. Kindle at the second event that I went to, I certainly heard that, you know, she wanted to have metrics as well. And I'm curious, you know, when you mentioned surveying, I'm glad to hear that we're doing that. And I'm hopeful that we're surveying those who choose to leave as well as those who are asked to leave. And then I was just curious, as David said as well, you know, how are we then keeping track of that information and using those metrics to guide our work?
Yeah, and just for your knowledge, I do create I do have a spreadsheet. So based on some people I do talk to face, like if their resignation caught me, or if there's something, I will go physically to them and talk with them versus just sending them a survey. But we survey everybody, retirement, resignation, staff that are, you know, we survey everybody. So I have created that and utilize that for at least my brain internally to start, and then to kind of determine, I've got a principal training coming up. So based on that information, I'm embedding that just to give principals the knowledge of what's happening currently so that we can move forward. But yes.
To support and retain.
Yes, definitively. Yeah, because they have to, some of the teachers of color, you are the only one, right? And so, a large part of that is the hiring component, right? Like if everybody you hire doesn't look like me, then it kind of leaves the impression that, we're not good enough, right? And so that has been shared. We've processed and we've talked about it, and some principals, if not all, have put a lot of efforts into try to work through that. And so we are still working. Our numbers are better, but it's still, we got a lot of work to do.
And then my second question would be, as you're talking about professional development that they're asking for, just to be clear, they're asking for their own professional development, the teachers of color, but also the professional development of white teachers?
Yes. Yes. So they want holistically PD for administrators with regard to anti-racism, anti-bias, and then the same training or something catered to the remainder. So they want the entire district employees to be trained on anti-bias, anti-racism that's fitting the work that they do, if that makes sense.
It does. And, anecdotally, when, I hear my friend's son keeping track of things that happen and are said around him in the classroom, I also know that he's keeping track of what's said to him on the bus and what's said to him on the playground and what's said to him in the hall and what's said to him in the cafeteria. And all of these microaggressions certainly have have an effect on him. And so I'm glad to hear, and I am hopeful that we're including support staff in this training as well.
Absolutely. And they've even advocated for counseling for students. We touched on it, but not a lot. But how do you help children identify and know what a microaggression is? What a hidden bias is?
Yeah.
How at what age do you introduce these topics? How do you help children identify it? Because that's hard. I'm a 10-year-old kid and I can feel this. I can't name it. And then I've got to call out my teacher. I'm afraid, I'm scared, which I think why some of these things may go unspoken, right? Until a child can find the courage to do so. So they've talked about that too. How do we prepare our children? You know, what topics are appropriate? When do we introduce it? And then how do we help them to see their way through that? So,
I mean, I had a second grade teacher tell me that she heard things happening in her classroom that she would consider microaggressions. And so I think all of our students need to have an understanding of what that is, honestly.
Yep.
Hey, I actually had similar questions as Christine. And one of those is kind of about the survey, the exit survey, I guess. And specifically, I guess picking up on what you said, that people don't respond with it being racial, but they say we can do better. Are we direct, like how direct are we in our questioning? Are we direct enough asking, you know, is it, you know, do you feel like on a scale of 1 to 10, like is race one of the reasons why? I don't know. I'm just trying, not race, but you know, racial equity or how you were treated.
Yeah, so we do definitively ask straight out. Do you believe that you were seen, that you were heard, that you were valued as an employee of Webster Grove School District? We call that out clearly. We ask them very clearly, can you name or tell us definitively why you chose to leave the district? What are some definitive areas we do great and what are some areas that we don't do great? And some of those questions, like, do you feel valued? Do you feel like you were seen? Do you feel like you were heard, or on a Likert scale? So strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree. And then NA, you know, if they feel like it's not applicable to them. So we do ask that definitively of them. We don't, as you're asking that question, I was reflecting, I don't think we have a question that speaks directly to racial inequalities. Or do you feel like you've experienced any microaggression or anything? Like, we don't ask those specific questions. So I think we can take the survey back and take a look at it and see if where we can embed questions that will call it out specifically and ask. We can definitively do that. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was really happy to hear your conversation about the posting of positions and recruitment, and then in particular the pieces about the screening process, because I think that's really crucial to ensure that we have sort of a diverse candidates of people at the table. So I was glad to hear that. The other piece for me is thinking about the policy piece and the annual report piece that John brought up earlier, and sort of the community stakeholder involvement in both of those things and how we talk about them. I think that is absolutely critical, that we continue to listen to those voices that have been bringing issues up with the Uprooting Racism event and the March for Change, both of those things. So being sure we're continuing to listen and involve those stakeholders in not only the creation of the policy, the updating of that policy as we think about it as a living, breathing document and a living, breathing thing. So that's a continuous loop for that feedback, I think, is incredibly important. And I'd say the same thing about the annual report. You know, when we're thinking about how we're doing as a district, involving stakeholders and the community in that process, I think is also important, whether it's some sort of you know, unveiling of that and conversation with the community about it, or however we decide is most appropriate. But I think including those stakeholders in that conversation and listening to them and continuing to understand and learn from them is really important as well.
Thank you.
I was just, when you're talking about the survey, I feel like we need to know specifically when if people are saying they're not supported, does that mean by the administration? Does that mean by their building principal? Does that mean by their teachers? Does that mean by the parents? Because I feel like the solution or how we're going to better support them is going to be different depending on, and maybe it's all of those things, but it seems like that's important to know, like where's the
breakdown?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do some of those questions that on the Likert scale is divided by district and then divided by building. So do you feel supported district level? Do you feel like you were communicated with? Do you feel like you were seen? Those are separated by district and then they're separated by building. Now we haven't broken it down to like your team. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Did you feel the support from your team? Did your team treat you fairly? That's another piece that we could add, right? For especially classroom teachers. You know, when you worked as a second grade team, how did you feel? You know, district level and as well as building level. So we can even break that down even further.
And maybe it's a survey that needs to happen, not just when people leave, right? So
yeah.
So that you're keeping, like the teacher that spoke from Edgar Road, you know, if we hadn't had all the march and all that, we, at least as a board, I would never have known her struggles. And, you know, obviously, yeah. So maybe it's something we need to be talking to maybe all of our teachers, but for sure the teachers, the Black and brown teachers, to see what we can do to make it better so that we don't lose them.
And as a part of my feedback in the work I was doing with Dr. Banks is I did embed a survey for them 3 times a year. Awesome. So, and it's asking some of those questions. For some of the teachers who have struggled, just for your knowledge, those are definitively, once I know about them, I'm heavily involved in supporting them with whatever that is or looks like. You know, if I don't know, I often, you know, try to process through like, why didn't I know? Did they not trust me enough to tell? You know what I'm saying? Like, so just really trying to figure that through. But if we know about it, if we hear about it, if we process it, we are there. And they're not coming to us, I'm going to them.
And I'm sure some of that is that they feel like you have a really big job and their problem and the team of the district is really small. So they don't feel like they can reach out to you when they in fact could. So yeah.
And someone has said that to me, like, I know you have bigger things to do. And I'm like, what bigger than you, right? Like your individual person is important to me. Right. So I think, you know, those are messages that I'm constantly sending and I will continue to do that. But yeah, I remember when I taught in Ladue, I was the only teacher of color in my building. So I know those things. I can relate to those things, like, you know, and that was years ago, right? And to know that it's still happening today, it's like, okay, Sandy, you know, but those experiences there helped me to support teachers here. And I keep shouting it in front of them all the time. Like, I'm here, reach out, call me, here's my cell. But they do feel that way sometimes, that like you got too much stuff to do, that my problems don't matter, and they do matter.
Absolutely.
I think another piece of it is how we have their back when echoed in some of the speeches, as well as just, you know, what we saw through the boundary line processes, through we know a number of things that come from community and our parents, and just how do we support them with that particular group, as well as the groups that are within our particular schools all the time. I think it's important.
Well, also making sure that they realize that it's okay if it's a microaggression, like it doesn't have to be I'm sure for some people, I can only imagine that for some people, they feel like unless they have, you know, a big dramatic incident happen, they're not going to take it anywhere. Whereas all those little daily microaggressions are going to eat away at them. And so in fact, you know, that they need to bring those up as well and feel like that's okay. They should be bringing them up.
Yeah. One of the things that we have a few more in progress before we jump to the what's new or what's next, but jumping really briefly, Keita had shared a website from another school district in Cambridge that has a really great site with a lot of great resources. And Sherry can attest, I already have her creating replicating this document that they have, because one of the things that I feel like Sandy is saying, like if we hear it, we know of it, we're there. Like there hasn't been an incident that we didn't know about that we weren't all over. Now, can I say that for every human being in the organization? No, I can't. Do we need to have everybody in the organization be like that? Yes, we do. but having something where, and this also goes to something Christine talked about, where it's really, really clear, we're defining what microaggressions, racist incidents, all these things are, and how you go about reporting it, like who you report to. You can go with friends. What happens to it? Because a lot of times people think I did it and I didn't see the consequence. I don't know what happened, you know. And we have, obviously there's laws that say you can't, you know, but the document does a great job of really spelling out for both our children, both our students, as well as adults, who you go to. It lays out, you know, our commitment to try and make this anonymous, you know, for you. But it's a really great document. And that's one thing when I spoke with Ezra, I've spoken with him a few times. He's going to be a part of that policy group. He kind of liked that response to Sandy. It's like, yeah, I appreciate all these things you're doing, but it's so big. And, you know, his piece was like right now, there's not anybody in the school. There are teachers of color in the building that I will go to if something happens. But here we're outside of school when all this happened. And so it really lays out going to somebody you trust. Then it lays out different. In this district, they have, you know, and with students, they involve like a student services person, a diversity director, director of diversity. And then with the staff one, it also has kind of multiple layers. And so we're already working on that. That's a need, and it's got to be put in students' hands, teachers' hands. It's got to be plastered everywhere. And that also can serve as that benefit of that database, you know? So.
But I'm sure if you're a teacher, like the teacher at Edgar Road, who's the only Black teacher in the school, it's hard to feel like it's going to stay private, like who it came from, right? People are going to know. So I don't know how you fix that and give them the sense that it's okay for them to speak up when people are going to realize exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say at Edgar, they're up to about 4.5. And I say half because we've got a social worker that supports another school, but they're up. They're up.
That's good.
But you're right, Joe, you're definitive, because
you're right.
What we hear, they say, you know, I don't want to become the angry, you know, Black person, or I don't want to become the, you know, the person that's telling on their colleagues. I still have to work with these colleagues. I still have to get along with them. I see them every day. So how am I balancing, yes, what you're doing is wrong, but I don't want to tell everything, you know, like, you know, how do I balance that? What do I do, and what steps do I take? So we lined up some speakers. We had a speaker lined up, but COVID happened, right? So those are things that we're trying to help them develop them in, and to help them find their strengths, and who are their white allies in the building, or what we're calling in some instances co-conspirators, who when they see it, so I don't have to say it, you know, if Joe and I are together, Joe can speak up for me, you know, or Christine can speak up for me. So it's not just me all the time. And so that's the other part of that coin, that, you know, if we are in the same space and, you know, Susie Q is, you know, displaying, you know, a bias or whatever towards me, that I don't have to always call it out, that I have Joe, I have Christine, I have, you know, Alan that'll call it out for me, or with me, so that I'm not just seen as this, you know, unhappy, angry person that finds fault with everything.
That's really good. That's a good strategy, I think.
Just speak for a second, or comment on, I guess, my concerns as from a school board perspective. I think that we struggle, I know I struggle with wanting to empower and trusting our extremely competent administrators to do their jobs. And I think we do a very good job of that. But the flip side is it's incredibly heartbreaking and disappointing. And I feel guilty, for lack of a better word, when I hear our employees make comments in a public forum, such as we've heard, and our students, such as we've heard recently. And while I know as a school board member, and you all know, and we get various reports on the initiatives with hiring and addressing student discipline issues and all of that stuff, it's apparently not enough. And I guess my ask is that when it gets beyond an individual situation and we're talking about issues such as those that are in the list that Keita presented and others have presented that are curricular changes and policy changes, those are board responsibilities. And we shouldn't have to make our community bring those to our attention. So I guess my ask going forward is, if you think there's more that we can or should do as a Board of Education, please do not hesitate to bring that to us, because I think all 7 of us now will wholeheartedly support those efforts.
Thanks, Amy. I really agree. And something else I was thinking about was, we have 2 students who sit on the board. Do any districts ever have a teacher, or is there ever any interest from teachers to kind of sit in that same sort of space on the board?
I'm not aware of any personally. Amy, you get to more board meetings. Have you ever seen a teacher?
No, I'm not familiar. I've never seen a district do that. The student rep is pretty rare in and of itself, but I've never seen a teacher rep. I think there's a presumption that it is potentially a conflict of interest. I don't think in Webster that would necessarily be the case. We have a really collaborative relationship with our teachers, and the issues committee is a good example of that. But so I guess the short answer is I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the work that the issues committee does, I think that there are for those of you who haven't served on that, those discussions are very robust. I've never felt that there is a shortage of willingness to go and speak up there, and certainly I would hope that the teacher now, in terms of the makeup of that, is that the best makeup? I think they do a very good job, but certainly would encourage their colleagues to reach out to them. I tend to think that's probably a better avenue, and frankly that's probably a more robust avenue that allows a much greater exchange than having another advisor to the board. And I'm also at the same time, I'm conscious that asking our teachers to, now will you go and spend two evenings a month going and sitting at a table so you can provide advice to the board as well, I'm not sure it's the best use of their time either.
Thanks, David. I forget about that committee because I believe I cannot serve on that committee. So, but could we do a better job from that committee letting teachers know that we want to listen? Then maybe is the question. And that
I think certainly we can report back to. I think certainly the reps on that committee should make it clear to that committee that the board is very actively seeking their input. Mm-hmm. All right, I on the one hand, this is good, and on the other hand, I want to make sure that we sort of get to the things that as much as we can this evening within the time allowed. So, John, I think Pam was going to speak to us next.
Yeah, Pam could touch on her project, and Jason has stuff to share, and yeah.
Good.
Good evening. So one of the goals that came from our work with Dr. Banks for systemic change was, how do we look at budgeting and looking at it a little bit different, and how do we ensure that budget dollars are being spent on equity? I also wanted to point out that Joanne Kite was also very instrumental in setting up this goal. So it could be in the building level, maybe the principal is going to ensure that they're replacing resources in a classroom, they're replacing library materials with materials that are more equity minded, or maybe it's professional development in the building. So all those things, a lot of those things are already being done, but we're just going to be a little more intentional in making sure they get done. I've reached out to the principals. All the principals are supposed to get back to me and let me know how much of their budget and what they're going to spend it on. They can let me know in dollars or a percentage of their budget. So we do have an idea of what they're doing towards equity, and we are able to track that also. Then one of the other things too, I know Christine was at the Building Advisory Committee meeting we had last week. We had a really good meeting and some really good ideas were brought up. And one of the things that the committee talked about is looking at policies for bidding out construction projects. And I've reached out to MSBA to see if they have some recommended wording, because could we set up some goals to make sure that we have a diversified workforce on our projects? So I'm waiting to hear back from MSBA, and I'm also going to look at some other school districts to see what their policies say, and then we'll make a recommendation to the policy committee.
Thank you, Pam. Jason, do you want to jump in and talk about the social studies curriculum and some different things in terms of the professional development? Anything else you want to say from your lens?
Sure. So good evening to all of you. This is important work. I will say that has to happen, that is happening. And I'm energized to be a part of this work and looking forward to this opportunity. So as you all are aware, K-8, the social studies curriculum, has been in development for the last few years. We are, what I would say, probably in the middle of that development, which means that the curriculum is currently being written this summer, and that work will continue into the next school year, both at an elementary level, K-5, and then also middle school, 6th through 8th. The curriculum coordinators, just in initial conversations that I've had with them and that I've had with Dr. Dimbo, have been very intentional about making sure that the curriculum definitely honors all perspectives, not only in what we would consider, what many would consider to be the traditional light, but making sure that positive light is also given to contributions that have been made throughout history as well. And so we're trying to be very intentional, I guess is my key word, about incorporating that work into our curriculum as we are going throughout that process. Soon we will be in a position to where we'll be seeking feedback. And so one of our goals is to create a stakeholder group, a diverse stakeholder group, to review the curriculum, to offer feedback to the curriculum before it ever goes to the Curriculum Coordinating Council and then goes to the Board of Education. One of the additional things that I am in the process of pursuing is a potential partnership with an outside consultant who can review our curriculum work to make sure that the goal that we intended to accomplish with our curriculum revision is actually accomplished. And so one of the individuals that I am in communication with right now is Dr. LeGarrette King. He is the Associate Professor of Social Studies at Mizzou, and he hosts the annual Black History Conference each summer, where educators from across the region really come to share ideas of how they are incorporating various truths and various historical perspectives into their curriculum work. I've had a conversation with him. He's very interested in working with us and reviewing our curriculum, but then also providing professional development for our staff. He has worked with Maplewood Richmond Heights School District. He's currently working with the Ladue School District and several other school districts that are in the Kansas City area to do similar work. One of his primary focus areas is on developing Black consciousness in terms of social studies curriculum. And so when he speaks about Black consciousness, what he's meaning is awareness for non-people of color in terms of understanding the historical perspective and making sure that we are honoring all of those perspectives in an accurate manner as we're teaching that work. And so the way I think about it, we have curriculum, and then we have what actually happens in terms of introducing kids to that curriculum and inviting them to learn from that curriculum. And so what we want to make sure happens is that we have our curriculum developed in the way that we want it to be developed, but that we also allow for support for our staff to ensure that the conversations that we intend to happen with students and in the classroom actually happen in the way that we hope that they happen. And so part of that work will be to really develop those lessons beyond the curriculum, but then to also evaluate all of the resources that we have, not just K-8, but then also looking at the secondary, the high school level as well, to make sure that our resources support our end goal or our outcome in terms of making sure that we have addressed the needs that we want to address. One other thing that I would add is not only has the K-8 curriculum been aligned to the Missouri Learning Standards, They've also been aligned to the Teaching Tolerant social justice standards, which is quite honestly one of the first districts that I know of in this region that has done that work. And within the social justice standards, there's a lot of work around bias, all the way from K2 all the way through secondary. And so it's very interesting to me and very exciting to me that that work has been integrated into the social studies curriculum, which leads me to a next step that we are looking at. I'm in the process right now of reviewing a curriculum resource from the Anti-Defamation League, which is around building anti-bias, anti-racism development, if you will, within kids K all the way through 12th grade. And so Bristol had the opportunity to purchase this curriculum and used it somewhat last year. And so the principal there shared this resource. I've been reviewing it, very, very excited about what I'm seeing. And so looking at, is that a way of supporting the social studies curriculum work, or are there other avenues through which we can share this learning and provide these learning experiences for our kids K all the way through 12th grade? So we are in the process of looking at that. And then to, not to be redundant, but to Sandy's point around professional development, one thing I hope to do, along with Sandy and to Pam's point as well, around budgeting, to really look at how we can reimagine our professional development related to social justice, related to anti-bias work, not only in terms of developing an awareness on the part of the adults that are in the community, but then looking at instructional practices and how it actually translates into the classroom. And so one of my goals will be to work with others to develop a multi-year development progression that can really be not necessarily building based, but more systemic across the district. So as staff are onboarded into the district, this is a guaranteed experience that you will have, but then also working with building principals to make sure that everyone else who's already in the system participates in that development as well. So again, those are just my initial thoughts based on my limited knowledge coming into the district, but I'm very excited to be a part of this work and very excited to see what we can develop from here.
Jason, are you able to maybe give me a small example of what a teaching tolerance assignment might kind of look like?
Sure. So I actually left are you talking the teaching tolerance standards or the Anti-Defamation League curriculum resource, or either?
Either, actually. I'm interested in both, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
And then I don't know if there's a way to abbreviate, or I'm just kind of interested in what they kind of look like.
So I'm at the point where I've looked at the K-5 Anti-Defamation League resource. And what I'm seeing quite a bit, especially when you move, it's broken into K2 and then it's broken into 3rd through 5th grade. In K2, it's more focused on people have differences. What are similarities that we have? How do we treat each other with respect? As it moves into 3rd through 5th grade, they are using terms in terms of using vocabulary in terms of bias. I haven't seen microaggression just yet in this particular curriculum resource, but it builds over time. And so helping kids to have the language, to Sandy's point, have that vocabulary that they can use, but then also to help staff have that vocabulary and help them to understand their interactions that they're having with kids. And then the teaching tolerance social justice standards, and I'm happy to share all of this with you all, very much deal with similar language. It's also broken up into a K2, a 3rd through 5th grade, and then a middle school, and then also a high school. And really the intention is to be developmentally appropriate as it goes throughout the continuum, to make sure that the conversations we're having with kids are developmentally appropriate. We know that we can have tough conversations with kids, and kids can do much more than we think sometimes that they are capable of doing, but to make sure that we're honoring where kids are in their learning experience as well. Ida, does that answer your question somewhat?
It does. Yeah, I know I can't look at every little word, but yeah, I just was interested in what a teaching tolerance assignment would look like. So yes,
sure. And I'm happy to share that resource with you so you can take a look at the standards. I'm very much happy to do that.
That'd be awesome. My other question, because I know this is one of the requests of the teachers of color, are teachers of color in the process of, and I know you said you were going to be creating a stakeholder group. Are they being consulted in some of this, especially our teachers of color that are in social studies or in literature or in history? Are they being consulted, or do you plan on consulting them? Do you plan on working with them? Because I know they're very interested in being at the table in that process.
Sure. So just in my initial conversations, to some degree, yes, which has led me to want to bring in an outside consultant to make sure that we are honoring all of the voices and all of the perspectives. And so as we look at developing that stakeholder group, very much so, we want to make sure that our teachers of color are around the table, along with our families are represented as well, to make sure that all of those perspectives are there.
Okay, awesome. That sounds awesome.
Okay.
Question for, if we can back up for Pam, John, if that's okay.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
So when you were, Pam, when you were talking about the building level, the resources for equity work and professional development, those sorts of things, and you were going to ask them to report to you sort of by dollar amount or by percentage, do we have or have we set a goal, like a percentage goal for each building to spend on this kind of work? If not, maybe we should consider setting some sort of goal for each of these buildings to dedicate some of their resources to equity work.
Yeah, we did not this first year, since this is the first year we're doing that, but we will get more aggressive in that. Just kind of felt like in this first year, we need to kind of see what they're already doing, because I think I might be a little bit surprised when we get the results back of what they're already doing, but we can always push to do more, and we will definitely work towards that. That's a great idea.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pam.
Well, wanted to move forward and jump in with any questions. Wanted to move forward with some of the things that we are recently initiating or proposing. First, more symbolic than anything, but an expression of commitment. We are going to do, as you know, something similar as to our neighbors, Webster U, to communicate our stance on racial equity with a sign in our central office. Then our plan is to, when our schools return, have our children participate in something that they create similarly in their own schools. That is that representation. So just wanted to, Kathy V's kind of taking the lead on that. We are also moving forward, and John Thomas is on vacation. Something that we've wanted to do for a while and we're doing is moving forward with, we're working on a contract, so it's not finalized, but working with Alive and Well to do the trauma-informed work as a learning community. And so what that is would entail would be every single school, as well as our central office in the school district, would undergo their training, which includes trauma related to systemic racism in white spaces, and everything that all of our children, our staff, experience throughout life. But that would start with a 3-day training that comes with learning and awareness related to trauma-informed. And then it dives into action planning right then, specific plans that are created by those schools, by a central office. And then the trauma-informed team meets monthly with those groups or bi-monthly with each of those groups. And it's all about, how's your plan going? What needs tweaking? What do we need to do? And then there's also a lot of different development opportunities for our staff that are provided as being a part of an Alive and Well community. They've got a great reputation. Colleagues in U-City, Pattonville, Rockwood speak extraordinarily highly to this particular group. So I did want you to know that that work is going to be initiated this year. I mentioned the single report. The March for Change committee, they have continued to move and wanting to move even more with their work. They want to this summer to further community movement in the direction of equity, putting out a weekly challenge to our district community, which I think is really cool. They've met like 3 times. They ran the idea by Kathy and I. We worked with the Webster Kirkwood Times because they want to put it in the Webster Kirkwood Times for to let them know by when they would have to get it to us to kind of proof. And then it needs to go back to them to make sure our proof doesn't take away from the language and intent of what they wanted to share. And then we'll get it to the Webster Kirkwood Times. So it would be something that would be pushed out and shared internally through like the school system, but then it would also be in the Webster Kirkwood Times. Again, trying to build on the movement that they created as a group that brought 1,500 people there that particular day. We've talked about in that group how to, and it's something we've talked about internally, how to work to re-envision the Equity and Education Committee to focus more on action. And so we will be coming together as a group of a leadership group with those teachers from both those entities and administrators to talk about how to make that happen. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of bring to you that is a budgetary impact, and with respect of knowing that our budget, circumstance is not what it was, but feeling the priority exists, is to, for the 2021 school year, employ a director of diversity, equity, inclusion. Feeling like while our efforts to become a more equitable, inclusive, anti-racist, anti-bias organization is responsibility of us all, that we could really benefit from somebody who is helping lead these efforts and supporting us, supporting our staff, our children, and our families. They would be in collaboration. They would have they would be a director, which means they would be in this office with us. And as we talked about this, we deliberated on some different positions that they might be and felt that it was important, consulted with Dr. Banks too, for the person to be in a role that has power and influence, and the director position does. We would want this person to report directly to me, given my role kind of, with all the different functionings of the district, to be actually next door where Bruce had formerly been. We haven't fully developed the job description, but it's going to be when you talk about developing, coordinating professional development, when you talk about looking at development of curriculum, we have a lot of training that we currently do. This person has a big role, or would have a big role. And we've also talked about being that contact. I mentioned that other school district. If there's something that I'm feeling, and like Sandy said, I might not be able to give language to it, who do I reach out to? Do I reach out to my trusted adults? No, but I could reach out to this person. This person is in that line that could be that support to me. And so again, kind of bringing that to you as a recommendation. We right now, with the other items, we're going to be able to absorb those within our existing budget through shifting budgets. And because it's a little bit newer and we haven't been together a lot as an administrative team, it could have a financial impact that would cause us to, again, be a little bit more in that deficit spending category. So that's why bringing it to you to hear your thoughts on the idea, and your wondering your support regardless of whether we're able to fund it within our existing budget or to add on to our budget. Any thoughts?
I definitely support it. I think that it would be supported throughout the community. I guess I'm just curious as to what criteria this person, like what criteria would you have as in regards to hiring this person?
Yeah. We haven't we've talked about the role of the person, but haven't then worked backwards for that criteria yet, to be truthful. It's, you know, Sandy and I talked a little bit more about it today. It's got to be somebody that people can connect with, feel comfortable going to, somebody that possesses what we feel is courageous, is charismatic. Ideally, somebody that has experience in leading development and evaluating systems and practices. But we haven't worked backwards yet.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
I support it. I first wanted to say I so appreciate hearing about Alive and Well at the most recent leadership MSBA meeting. I listened at lunchtime to the teacher, former teacher of the year, who talked about trauma-informed teaching, and she said every single child entering the school this coming fall because of COVID will come with at least one mitigating factor of trauma because of this experience. And I just think it's perfect timing. And I think this will, I think it's just going to help us care for kids.
Thank you. You know, we talked about that, Christine, even though we're starting the leadership team, you know, is a group from the high school or from all the schools that are involved in the regular. But John and I, when we spoke with them, just talked about like, we need to do something for our teachers. We need to give them some development to start, and then they'll get a lot more along the way, but for the exact reason that you mentioned. So.
Yeah, but I also support the director position for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I support that as well. I think just having another voice is always a good thing, and someone that's got that background is going to be, I think, immensely helpful to the district.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm also supportive. I guess one question for me would be, knowing that the hiring of administrators, this is a little bit off on the timing of some of that, do you see that being a little bit of a barrier, or do you see this, you haven't developed the criteria, but this person may not necessarily have to have come through a school system either, I'm guessing. So just sort of wanted to hear what you thought about the timing of the hiring and how that could be impacted.
Yeah, Sandy, you want to speak to that? I can speak to it, but you want to speak to that?
Doesn't matter, either one of us. But no, I don't see it. I don't foresee it. This position not necessarily requiring a certification. And then also the second component is my goal will be to find someone who is actively doing this work, has done some research, has some other components behind their belt that is not just going to be found with having an administrative certification. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. I do worry just for the mere fact that it's June and I would like to have the person now, right? And knowing that school starts in August and the work that has to be done. But I think as long as we properly get it out there, post it, have it in a variety of venues, and maybe John Simpson does another wonderful video. I think, you know, his videos typically draws a nice crowd of
very funny.
I think as long as we have a variety of modalities by which we are posting it and get it out there, I wouldn't necessarily be worried with the timing. We've not hired for this type of position, so I don't know what the applicant, I don't necessarily know what to expect, right, with what we would get. But I think we're going to really rely heavily upon the people that are doing this work, like Dr. Banks. There's a couple of other people that are out there doing this work who could potentially lead and guide us in some directions of possibly recruiting some good people. So.
Great, thank you.
I'm, of course, definitely support the idea in theory, but I'm going to be, not to be a wet blanket / the lawyer of the group, but I'm going to have a lot of questions about, like, I can't say, yes, let's hire this person without knowing the budget impact. So I'm going to want that information first. I would also like to know more about what exactly we anticipate that this person would do. And Sandy alluded to the fact that we haven't had this position in our school district. To my knowledge, most K-12 school districts in Missouri don't have this position. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to define what the expectations are of the job. It's pretty common in higher ed to have a director of diversity and inclusion, but not so much in K-12. So I have a lot of questions, but yes, I absolutely support it in theory, but I'm going to want to talk about it some more.
Mm-hmm.
So can I suggest that lest we sort of get bogged down in this, that for the next board meeting, that John and Sandy and whoever come back with a broader plan that includes all the various things that have been raised here. I think, I mean, in terms of the budget, I mean, yes, I mean, I'm normally the fiscally conservative one. I think there, I mean, basically, I look at the budget as it's a statement of intent from the board. So if the board thinks this is important, then the board will instruct the administration. You find a way to fit this into the budget, and you budget according to your priorities. So I'm perhaps less fussed about that, but I would like the whole thing laid out sort of better for us. And so, if it's all right with my fellow board members, if we can sort of curtail this part of the discussion, but please come back to plan an agenda item for the next board meeting is to go and lay this out in more detail. Alex, I apologize. You were about to say something and I just jumped in on you.
Yeah, I will table it.
Okay.
Yeah, what you said is what I was thinking. So.
Okay. All right. Good stuff.
Can I just do just one thing? I think the only thing is that if we wait till the next board meeting, which will likely be, mid to late July, which will be, primarily everything related to our COVID entry plan, it will just be delaying. We're going to miss out. It's going to take us a while to get it out there. Would it be possible to articulate this in writing? And even if we had a quick board meeting about it, maybe as soon as we can get it together.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine. So just I think I mean, witness that we're having this special workshop because a number of board members, sort of, myself included, felt that despite the good work that was being done, it was important for us to get together on this broad topic. And I am certainly absolutely fine with your scheduling something and bringing something back when you've got it together, and we will schedule a meeting primarily to discuss that and to work through that. But I'd rather do it that way than I do think we need more, rather than just giving you a carte blanche right now. But at the same time, we'll get it done quickly, as quickly as you can develop the things that you need.
Okay, we'll develop it.
I'm just looking around. Anybody who sees things differently than that?
A board meeting doesn't have to be 2 to 3 hours long every time. So.
I'm doing my best.
No, I'm just saying we can have one agenda item.
Absolutely, and again, this is important stuff, and how we follow up is going to be one of the key things here. Okay, any other sort of prepared material you had from your team?
No.
In which case, the next thing I'd like to do, I'd like to actually just ask if it's right, ask Keita to, and so Keita, you've joined in, and some of the questions related to some of the things that you had you presented before, but I'd like to throw the floor open, if it's all right, to you, just to talk a little bit about the demands that you presented. And I think it's a good framework for discussion for the board. So if that's all right, I'm going to throw this to you for a minute.
Sure. Actually, the things that were in my demands are pretty much being addressed. I was looking at a list of the student demands of the school district that was a part of the March for Change committee. And I was also looking at a list of some of the teachers' demands there, and they are kind of still formulating things. And Sandy went over several of those. They're pretty much all being discussed. The students want to make our school system safe and nurturing for students. Obviously, that's why we're here. Updating the curriculum. I get a lot of questions about that. People are worried about revising history and this kind of thing. Well, I think what we need to acknowledge is that history has already been revised. And so now it's just a matter of kind of straightening it out and making it more inclusive. You know, I'll leave this to the teachers and the curriculum experts, but things that I kind of maybe give examples to people when they ask questions would be like adding more Black inventors on the elementary level. I mean, we talk about Alexander Graham Bell, we talk about Thomas Edison. We don't talk about Garrett Morgan. Does anyone know who Garrett Morgan is? Anyone? I'm gonna go with a no. So
No.
Garrett Morgan was an African-American who invented the traffic lights that we use. He was the guy who invented it. Elijah McCoy. He worked with steam engines and how to lubricate them and things like that. And the phrase "the real McCoy" is where his name is where we get that from. These are just things that I'm an example of things that we could add to the curriculum. When children, it's the same as seeing teachers of color. When children see other people of color that look like them, they start to feel more like they matter. When they don't see them and it's just kind of a blip about slavery, then they feel like that's all they are. And so that's why it's important to me. I'll just say on a personal level, you could also get into, as you get higher up, you get in middle school and high school, we can start learning about policy. I was speaking with Tracy Mack and I thought he made a very good point. When you learn about things that happen, learn how they affected policy. Things like redlining. How does redlining affect our town currently? Why do most people of one color live on one side of the train tracks and other people on the other color live? The point is to get them, along with the teaching tolerance and other things, to get them to start thinking of how policies and things like that affect people's lives in general. I read an article today about how race and climate change are actually intertwined, because most problems with climate change, like clean drinking water and things like that, are dealing with people of color. So I can see that being an important thought as well for kids. It's in our resolutions. I pulled it up, and this was from 2001. Says, among other things, we believe in fostering equity, justice, acceptance, dignity, and equal rights for all children and adults. Whereas we strive to remove social, cultural, and educational barriers that members of our district community may experience through learning, advocacy, and community partnerships. Those are two of the things that stuck out in our resolution. The other thing that I feel is important, especially maybe with EIE, if you're going to rebuild EIE, maybe make it more reach out to the community, because we can do whatever we can at school, and that's awesome. These kids still have to go home. And at home is where they tend to learn most of these microaggressions. Are there things in the community that we can do? The weekly challenges would be awesome. That's a start. Are there things there people want actionable steps? Can the EIE perhaps do things like fundraise so that so there can be more equitable opportunities for all kids, for kids on free and reduced lunch that would be inclusive of everyone. These are just thoughts on my part. Also, I think we still need to make sure that we as a board participate in some of these PD classes. A, so we know what's happening, and B, so that we can address some of our own biases, things that we don't even realize we might be doing. That would be helpful in structuring policy. Structuring, I don't know, teacher hiring practice. Well, we don't really do that, but you get my point. Can we perhaps institute social justice, an actual social justice class on the high school level? And it kind of looks like, I mean, maybe with the Teaching Tolerance and the Anti-Defamation League classes that Jason was mentioning, kind of looks like that might address it, but can we have just an actual social justice class? Could there be something along the lines of the Thrive thing, but to deal with social justice, where kids get, you know, hands-on opportunities to learn how to go out into the world. Like the lead, I know that Mr. Hazelton does an awesome job at Hickson with the leadership group there. Maybe we grow that at Hickson. Maybe we bring it on up to the high school. These are just things that I'm throwing out. People want actionable steps, and we don't want any more data collection. We know there's issues. Quite frankly, I think what people want to see as far as a number is, you know, okay, what money is being directed to go here towards these deficiencies, or, you know, what can we do? That's what a lot of people are asking. What can we do? As the board, we can do policy. We can encourage things like with the curriculum and other things. Hopefully, with this momentum, the community will be willing to jump in as well. That's just kind of where I am. I'm happy to have any kind of conversations, any kind of talking points, anything with community members, with anyone. If there's questions as to why this is necessary, it's necessary for the kids. Not all of our kids are having a good experience. And so that's who we're here for, and that's what we're doing this for.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So I'm conscious to my promise that I wanted just to be done, you know, basically by 9 for this. And obviously there's a lot more that we can sort of talk about. So I do think, I think that the last point that you made is one that's very important to me. Again, it comes back to what does going beyond talking look like? What do commitments look like? How do you measure the commitments? Things like that. And so definitely as we're doing, as the administration's doing more work, I think that it's very important to me that that is part of anything that they report back with. I guess let me just throw this open to the rest of the board. Two things. One, and anything right now you want to talk about, and second, do you have any thoughts in terms of how what the next step should be? It sounds as though we're probably going to have a special meeting sooner rather than later to discuss the new director level position, and we could certainly take some of the time to look at that, and we could take some of that time also to go and extend and continue the conversation that we've begun tonight. But let me just, if we can sort of go round the horn and just get feedback from the rest of the board as to what you think. I'm happy to call. I'm just going to call on you in turn as I sort of see you on my screen. So Christine, I'll ask you, go to you first. You're muted. You're still muted.
I lost one of my monitors last night, so my mouse doesn't work in the same way it used to. Sorry. Okay. I might need you to repeat your question because I was thinking about. I might need you to repeat your second question because I was thinking about your first question. There were two things that I had thought about that I didn't have a chance to ask. One is, and I've brought this up before, I don't know if it exists in a school district, but I was curious because I heard Ezra say, and it was so clear to me how he eloquently said this, that for every act of racism, he wants an equal anti-racist act in our district. And I wondered if we could develop some sort of racism happens here sort of database to track these, so we know where it's happening and we have a better understanding of how to create anti-racist acts around that. I do like that the principals are now addressing this because I want students to feel like they can go to the principals and they're being heard. The second thought I had was around communication and how can we make sure that these teacher equity groups, parent equity groups at each school are active, visible, and connected. And maybe that happens in the reshaped EIE, but that was a question I had. And so, David, your second question, please.
So my second question was just how do you want us to? What are the next steps we as a board should be taking? Just in really more in terms of how do we continue this discussion, and then how do we go and think about our instructions, via policy, our instructions to John in terms of how he should move forward.
I mean, that's a huge question. I think let's look at this anti-racism policy and let's hear more about this director of position, see how it fits in the budget and what that is supposed to look like. Okay. I might have some thoughts after I hear others.
Okay, that's great. Alan?
All right. So I think to piggyback on what Christine said, I think the communication issue is key, particularly with some of the other groups and the work that's going on. I like the idea of the re-envisioning the EIE groups to include maybe some of those equity groups and those sorts of things. There's a way to re-envision that to keep the momentum going and keeping everybody working sort of in the same direction. I think that's important. In terms of next steps, I think it is incredibly important for us to be thoughtful, to listen, to learn, but to act, to do some things. And to your point, David, measure and evaluate, and then if something's not working, not be afraid to change it because that's the way we decided to do it, right? Like, I think what's really important to me in this work is to listen, learn, act, and know that we're not always going to get it right the first time. We're not always going to get things right, but we have to be willing to listen and learn and move forward a different way if necessary. So that's really important to me as we think about making our next steps and sort of embedding that into the process and not being sort of stuck in doing things the same way because that's the way we've done it. So I think that's really important. In terms of next steps, I think there are lots of things that we need to think about evaluating. I think that policy piece is really, really important. So I think before I hesitate to jump too far past that before we know what that is and what all that entails. I can't really speak to getting past that until we know what that is.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, the main thing that I would say, and I think it's already been stated, is really, ensuring that there's always a spotlight on equity. So not a spotlight per se, but it's something that's top of mind. I think that, I guess my hope would be, that this equity officer, if that is a position that we all can agree upon, and after we learn a little bit more about it, reports from the superintendent and staff, it would sit right there and we'd hear about it every board meeting. So I think that's positive. I think that's going to give us more insight into the goings on of equity in the district than we currently have had. The only other thing I was thinking, I was kind of been looking for it, is I think Dr. Simpson, you had mentioned, you know, at one point there was a state of the district that we presented out, and I think maybe one of those sections was specifically focused on equity, or something that we were going to do. Or am I making this up?
Say that again. You're just kind of in and out a little bit to me. That we presented somewhere on equity. Is that what you're saying?
You present a state of the district.
Oh, yeah.
And then you focused a portion of that on equity.
True.
So I think that is something that we can continue to do as well. To give everybody an update on where we are and how we've improved, or maybe not so in equity.
Okay, thank you. Amy.
I don't have anything else I want to add tonight, and I've heard quite a few concrete outcomes in the realm of policy changes, curriculum changes, hiring changes. So I'm hearing lots of things to be excited about looking forward.
Thank you. Keita?
I agree with Alan. I liked what he said about being willing to admit mistakes and be ready to maybe go in a different direction if we find out if it's not working. All of this mess took over 400 years to create, so it's not going to be a magic button. Not going to be one magic thing that happens that resolves everything. I think maybe all the different committees, it would be a good step for the different committees to look at what they're doing from an equity standpoint. Like we said, the issues committee, what can the issues committee add? Can they add maybe a space within their meetings to talk about equity issues? The finance, I mean, obviously, you know, you guys are already kind of talking about that. Building advisories, maybe each committee, each of our subcommittees, if we can possibly make a space within those committees to start talking and looking at things from an equity lens, then more people working together, in my mind, is going to create better outcomes than just depending on one or two people. And I guess the next steps for me would be just to kind of keep looking at policy, really. Looking at other districts. I know that there are several other districts who have sort of the same demands of their school boards. There are some who are already doing this work. What can we glean from them? What can we learn from them? I think a policy change, or at least to know that we are working on it, something solid, is going to be a big step for us. And the curriculum as well. Just working to include and be more inclusive in the curriculum. I think those two big things are going to be big for me.
Thank you. Joe?
So I'm going to largely reiterate what's already been said, but I think when we did the equity resolution, however many years ago that was, I think everyone's intention was good, but I feel like it was kind of, there was nothing came of it in terms of action and solid actually moving forward. So I feel like in writing policy, then you're actually putting some action to that intention, which I think is something that's definitely needed. And I also think by one of the benefits of having the equity position in the district is just to have someone to give us guidance and look at what we've done and what we want to do and where we are, and help us figure out what we need to do through a different lens. Someone that can look at us with an unbiased or a new thought. And then again, I agree with Keita. I think looking at other districts is always good, especially ones that are doing it well, because we know they're out there. It's just a matter of finding them and looking at what they've done and what we could do similarly.
Thank you. So I think
just quickly to something that Joe said.
Absolutely, please.
I'm feeling a little bit defensive, I guess. I want to just say, I mean, I agree. When we passed the equity statement or made the equity resolution, I don't think that we didn't do anything. I think we haven't done enough, clearly. We need to do more clearly. But part of the issue is what I was alluding to earlier, is that I think our administrators have done quite a lot. And whether they've communicated that to the community or even to the board is another question. But I don't want to give the impression that they have not done anything in furtherance of our equity resolution, because I know that that's something that's really important and something that they have worked on.
And I don't mean to suggest that they haven't. And I think that the equity resolution was just a formality in a process that was already in place. I think as a board, we're all committed to equity, as are our administrators. I just meant that by putting it in policy, you're taking that resolution and making it something that's more concrete. Not that we haven't acted on it, but just that it puts that into something that's easier to look at and follow, and a guideline, I guess, for the district.
Fair enough. And I think communication, even if we adopt you could argue that adopting a policy is more of the same. It's, giving lip service to something. I think the communication piece of it, in terms of, what's being implemented and what are the results that we're seeing, whether they're positive or negative. And then if they're not what we wanted, what are we doing to revise our actions, are going to be really important.
Absolutely.
So I think we're all on the same page. I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that from the time, we hired Dr. Simpson, this has been a top priority for his administration.
No, I absolutely agree. I didn't mean to suggest that at all.
And to your point, Amy, maybe that is also a next step, is better communication as to what is being done. I mean, better transparency. How do we do that? How do we communicate that we are working towards this? How do we communicate that, these changes have been made, or we're trying to? Better communication and better transparency might be another next step for us.
I agree.
Okay. So I think, so to say, I mean, Dr. Simpson, I think that you've heard from the board, you've heard in terms of the next steps, you've some very immediate next steps in terms of the position and the back as to how that's going to work. I think at that time also, I think that, and again, I'll reach out to board members after this, other aspects that we'd like to get into more. Let's plan on purposing that time to go and cover that as well. And also, I think part of that, some thoughts in terms of, we've all stressed the importance of feedback, of measurement, and so some thoughts as to how we should think about that as well. If it's all right with the board, I'm going to suggest that we put this, we call this to a right now, but then, as I say, we'll find a time very soon to both to look at the position and then to continue. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
Okay, and in that case, with that in mind, just as a housekeeping matter, I'll accept a motion to approve the consent items.
Make a motion to approve consent agenda items 4.02, 4.03, 4.04, 4.05, 4.06, and 4.07.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, before I accept a motion to move into executive session, I want to thank everybody for John, you and all of your administration for your time spent, at very short notice putting this together. I think this has been a very good start. It's the start, and we've got, as we've all recognized, we've done a lot of good things up until now. But we've got lots more to do as well. So thank you very much to you and to all of your staff.
Yeah,
with that, I will entertain a motion to move into executive session.
I move we recess into executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel.
Okay. So the second was Alex?
Yes.
Good. If we can have a roll call vote, please, Sherry.
Mr. Addison,
Yes.
Mrs. Dahl,
Yes.
Ms. Clendenin,
Yes.
Ms. Quinn,
Yes.
Ms. Keller,
Yes.
Mr. Khan,
Yes.
Mr. Todd.
Yes.
Okay, we will now recess into executive session. And Bill, if you can end the YouTube